The Nook, Decoding Dimensions, is an English language program. The objective of the program is to cater to global as well as Nepali audience, wherein we invite different individuals from diverse backgrounds and delve into in-depth conversation, especially focusing in Nepali context. Join us today as we delve into the intricate layers of diverse perspective. I'm your host, Drishya Gurung. I'm thrilled to have with us today Ms. Manushi Yami Bhattarai, a youth politician and an academic. Welcome, Manushi ji.
Thank you.
Let's start with the first question. So, what are the most common questions people ask you these days?
Well, they generally ask me what am I doing, and my answer would be I'm active in politics, and I also teach. And basically, the status of the country right now, it's a very grim picture. It's not a very encouraging picture. So what are we as a society, as a group of young people trying to do about it? You know, these are the concerns that are largely being raised, and you know, it makes me think a lot about why am I doing politics.
Thank you for sharing. Probably we'll come back to this points as well, but I just want to reel back to where you started. Because you have been in politics since you were 15 years old, with over a decade-long career, political career. So how do you see your political ideology and belief evolve over time?
First of all, you know, the idea of politics was I never thought of it as a career or anything, you know. It was more about asking, who am I as an individual, and what is my relationship with the society that I'm a member of. And at a very young age, as you mentioned, I was 14 or 15 when I formally joined an organized sort of political organization. But as a young little girl born in Kathmandu, in a middle class family, fairly privileged in the sense that both my parents were educated, but they were also politicians. So I didn't know they were really politicians until I sort of, reached the age of, say, 12, 13. But then I had this consciousness of, that there should be equal treatment of people, there should be justice, because even within Kathmandu, where I was born into, if I just took a few steps, there was an area of, slum dwellers. So the harsh realities of urban life, I was exposed to that. I would go to village every now and then, my father's village, and I would see this stark difference in livelihood and the realities that they were facing, education, health facilities, infrastructure. So for me, it was deeply disturbing that there's something wrong, and so the politics that my parents were involved in, which was gradually they became leaders of the Maoist party. I started studying that, observing that, and I found it as a way of not only questioning, not only raising the right questions, but also try to sort of change that status quo and do something about it. So that's how it started.
Thank you. I would like to ask. I would like to explore more on your experience in mainstream politics. As a former activist student who transitioned into the mainstream politics, what challenges did you encounter during this transition? It would be great if you have any particular instance or experience you could share.
I find this word mainstream very interesting because we were part, as a young kid, I was part of this revolution. And not everybody, gets to live through that experience of that revolutionary process. And our whole idea was to actually change that mainstream, the mainstream that existed then, the mainstream that was responsible for, rapid discrimination in terms of the economic opportunities, education opportunities, and so on and on, political opportunities. So for me, when we came overground from that underground politics, our whole idea was we are entering a new mainstream. We have to create a new mainstream. And that's where I think, you're trying to understand that what's happening in the new phase. Actually, it's already been almost 2 decades now. It's going to be 2 decades soon, when, ever since the 2006 process of, the peaceful transition of our movement, I've realized that changes don't take place overnight. The revolution was very important in sort of shaking that ground, in raising the level of consciousness of people in urban areas, but mostly in the rural areas. The consciousness in terms of realizing that you have every right to your dignity, to talk about women's emancipation, to talk about Dalits' liberation, you know. So that was groundbreaking for Nepal. But then we've entered a new phase where we have to make a new constitution, and you have to formalize the changes that we claim that we've made. That's where I became more active. I was a student in Tribhuvan University then, and I was elected to the Students' Union. I was a representative. And there I learned many things about the actual realities of Nepal. Because before that, when I was underground, I was basically working with the migrant Nepali workers in different parts of Nepal. So that was a different, that was a big reality, but of a different kind. And here in Nepal, in the students' movement, I was faced with other realities. But it also gave me an opportunity as a student representative to make certain changes within the, campus. But, the problem with Nepal's politics, which still exists, is that everything is pretty much organized around hierarchies. So in the beginning, my first step into the so-called mainstream politics, I sort of thought of myself as a very low-level cadre, which I was. But then I didn't realize that as a university student, I could do much more. Looking back, I feel that I could have done so much more. But given the limitations of having to function within a campus, I think learned a lot in terms of what we could do within that limited space. And beyond that, a year back when I sort of contested the elections, that was an overall very different experience for me. Because in between that, I left the Maoist party and we started a new journey called the Naya Shakti, which was about developing new ideas and making our politics more relevant to the current demands. And that's where I thought now, now that Nepal has a new constitution and we have 3 tiers of government, the federal, the provincial, and the local, I thought that not much was being done to sort of formalize the lawmaking process, the administrative procedures, the whole state restructuring agenda that was there. That was not being formalized at the pace that was required. And therefore, I thought, I should, try to enter the federal parliament. And so that was a whole new experience. I lost the elections, but then I learned a lot.
So would you also count it as the one of the most challenging?
Definitely, definitely, because it made me think about how political behavior is shaped, what really motivates people to go out and vote, what does not motivate them to go out and vote. And so many intricacies, Throughout the years, I've been talking about very large things like, right, about equality, about justice. But as a student of political science, uh, I'm also very much interested in how institutions are shaped, what goes into making an institution and what comes out of it. So I thought, I could really use the federal parliament as a platform to deliver. But then in the process of contesting elections, I realized that many people have not actually understood how the different tiers of our government function. So even when you are appealing, when you are demanding certain things from a person who's contesting the federal elections, it's the same demands that you are sort of, asking from somebody who's contesting at the local level. So for me, it was largely a sort of a voter education campaign. And for many people, this was a new thing. But I hope that in the coming days, even though I lost the elections, I think it was a worthwhile experience, and I'll keep on striving. I've been encouraged to sort of keep on striving.
Just want to explore a little bit more on your experience while you're contesting as a Kathmandu from Kathmandu 7. How did the gender role played during your while you were sharing your own experience? How does being a woman, whether it has its own advantage or disadvantage, how did the gender role play, and how do you see it working in your own experience while you were contesting?
Well, gender is a big reality. Uh, Growing up, as the only daughter of two influential parents who are very progressive in their outlook, I was never made to feel like, I am somebody of a certain gender. I mean, they treated me like any kid of any gender. But then, as I step into society, I'm constantly made aware of my, gender identity. And my mother specifically was very conscious. She made a conscious effort to make me feel proud of myself as a young woman, and never to sort of, think that you're subordinate to anybody because of your gender. So I was raised in that way. But stepping into electoral politics, I was fully aware. I'm also a teacher of, gender studies. So this is something that I discuss in the classrooms. But then contesting elections was to actually face those realities was something else. For example, I felt that you are not taken as seriously because of your gender. And on top of that, as a young woman, not just a woman, but as a young woman, so you were, people in the political spectrum, for instance, those who were contesting at the provincial level alongside me, they felt that, here's this young woman who's standing in elections at the federal level, which is a higher, and how dare she. So, which is a completely lopsided understanding of Nepal's system, because in our constitution, the three tiers are not leveled up in terms of hierarchy. Three are equally powerful, right? It all depends on what kind of role you want to play and deliver. For me, I respect the representatives at the local level more. I think they do the massive amount of work than anybody at the lawmaking level. But for me, from my own capacity, my own capability, I thought I could contribute more to the lawmaking process at the federal level, because the provinces, still needed certain, lawmaking process at the federal level for the provinces to start, getting their tasks done. So, but at the political level, they were just thinking that this young girl um, is daring to sort of challenge us, and then she's somewhere below us. And the other thing was, they look at the form aspect rather than the essence of what you're trying to say. So I was trying to grab the attention of the public more through my appeal about the changes that I wanted to make. Let's say, I wanted to focus on certain legalities, say on education, on health, on other things like, conflict of interest, which at that time people didn't really understand. But then in the later days, now everybody's talking about conflict of interest. But, these were some of the things that I was advocating for. But then people were looking at my hair, for instance, or, because I had like massively gray hair, which I was very proud of. But then it became a constant distraction for people to not listen to what I was saying, but looking at my appearance, that you don't look presentable enough, you're not dressed as a politician, things like that. So that has an impact. Even though you know that you should not be affected by it, it does affect you in many ways. The other aspect is, of course, I am a mother of a little kid. So, being a mother again adds another layer of, the struggle that you have to go through, that, your kid needs you. So that's an added challenge that, the men don't have to face. So for me, largely, although, and this is despite being, belonging to a political family. I'm not like the average woman politician. I know I'm very privileged to belong to, this family of politicians. But despite that, I had to face, those subtle and not so subtle sort of behavior. I could just not imagine. I mean, you can't imagine the kind of difficulties that other women had to face. And of course, campaign finances is a challenge of another kind, which I think women face more than men. Everybody faces. Any sort of uncorrupt, any person who wants to be transparent and accountable in their political activities will have a big difficult time in Nepal contesting elections. They've become so expensive. But because women have historically been, they haven't had access to financial resources. So it's even more difficult. It's much more difficult for women to mobilize all sorts of resources, economic resources, even in terms of the social networking that goes around, the information, who controls the information? Because
Or where the
elections,
informations are.
yeah, where are they? Do you have access to them? The off-hour activities that take place. It's, the conversations that happen over drink, over at night, at late night. These are areas, these are spaces that are dominated and monopolized by men. That's something that women don't have access to. So, information is a big resource in election campaigns. And that's where I realized that, belonging to a certain gender, you are disadvantaged in certain areas.
So we'll come to that point, but I just wanted your experience while contesting from Kathmandu 7 and what has been your experience from gender lens, because of the recent experience that the education minister is going through, how people have been picking up on how she is dressing, how her hair is, how she is speaking, and connecting with the nationalism is very interesting, how we see a woman political leader. But I also don't want to make a sweeping statement on that. So thank you for sharing. Let's now shift focus to I think we have already touched on what is the situation of a woman in politics in Nepal. So today's reality is 42% of women participate in the local level, 36% in the provincial level, and 34% in the federal parliament. Now, what observation have you made regarding the increasing participations of women in political arena? You have already mentioned few things, but is there any added observation that is very interesting, considering the increasing participation, but few interesting observation?
Well, there are different strands of thought in terms of, the women's movement. And nowadays, you can't even talk about women's movement without talking about, plurality within it. Mostly the women's movement has been dominated by women from Kathmandu, very urban-centric, Kathmandu-centric, of a certain caste, class, region. So now there's been a growing, sort of contribution within the women's movement in Nepal from intersectional perspectives, from the Janjati perspective, Madhesi perspective, and all of that. So I think first point, that shift has happened in the past few years, in the past decade, which is very important. The other thing is that women's representation in politics was not only about numbers. It was never only about numbers. Nowadays, it seems to be more like, I think even the ones who entered the parliament or the ones who are advocating for, representation, sometimes I feel like, you've only compartmentalized the whole issue to just the numerical representation, which I think is a very flawed understanding. It should be about what is the representation for. So and of course, this is not to downsize the importance of the actual presence, which is very important. I mean, it didn't, and mind you, it didn't come on its own. It came through the struggle of thousands of people. It came through the sacrifices of thousands of people who were killed, who were raped, who were tortured. So it comes from that history of, movement where women were at the very forefront of it. So whatever, 33% representation in federal and provincial assembly, more than 40% at the local level. It did not happen because someone just decided to give it to you. We got it ourselves. We fought for it. But the other thing is, I think Sarah Tamang wrote in an article through her research work where she has brought out this aspect. Voice of women was saying that yes, we have been elected, but our hand and feet have been bound. So we do have the chair, but our hand and feet have been bound. So the representation, is it being tokenistic now? Are you just being used as instruments to show that, oh, Nepal is way up there in terms of inclusive representation? So is it just a showcase case, or do you actually want those women who've reached there to exercise power, to be able to make decisions? So that's where I think we should now be, focused on. So the representation thing is an ongoing thing. It's actually never enough for us. Proportionately, we occupy 51% of the population. So we can never be satisfied with the level of representation we have. But I think the more important thing for us is now to talk about why aspect of our representation. What should we be doing through our presence in those chairs? So I feel very proud to see so many women, mostly young emerging women who are now representatives. But I would hate to see them being bound up and not being able to exercise meaningfully.
I was coming to the next question, very similar to what you just mentioned. Um, so, what should be the next priority to enhance their participation in leadership role and addressing both their influence and effectiveness?
I wish I could say like one thing, or there could be a formula or something. I don't think there is. There's so many things happening.
Maybe
There's so many interconnected
from institutional perspective.
Even institutions, like I'm passionate about institutions, but I do know that institutions also have to stand on a certain ground that is driven by the political economy and the cultural foundations of the society. So you can't have a society where there's rampant sort of unemployment, where people are migrating in like thousands and lakhs of numbers, and culturally we are still in a very sort of, we are not able to do away with the conservative um, cultural traditions that existed, the feudal traditions that existed. We're trying to make that transition, but it's not happening at the pace that we require. So all of these do affect how institutions have an impact on society. But I do feel that since you're specifically asking from the political institutional level, I think the way that our representatives are chosen, for instance, look at, say, you aspire to become a representative, you want to contest elections. What is the process? It's not a simple process. It's a very opaque process. There's no lateral entry. There's not an easy lateral entry into any of these powerful mainstream political parties. You have to enter through a certain hierarchy. That is not enough. You have to be very pleasing to the topmost leadership, or you have to have huge amount of money that you can donate and influence the top leadership who distributes the nomination ticket. So through all of that process, you can imagine that to contest these elections, you already have become enslaved by the political parties and the political leaders. And so the output, what is the output of that? You're not able to freely express your thought. You're always scared. There's always something directing you from behind. And so that impacts how even women representatives function from those positions. So I think because the a new election bill is being drafted, one of the changes that can happen institutionally is to sort of uh, make political parties comply to, following um, certain steps of making your process more transparent, more, democratic, where, really people from deserving candidates get to sort of contest the elections, and that they're not occupied, uh, whether it's in the name of Dalits, women, or any marginalized community, so that, the process itself does not make them further enslaved politically. So I think that, and then, as I said, the electoral cost, the campaign cost. If the election commission and election bill does not say something very strong and concrete about the economic scandals that go behind, election campaigns, then we are doomed. Then our democracy is just going to be a formal democracy. It's not going to be a meaningful democracy. So things like that, these are the areas where institutionally and in terms of policy making and law making, we have to start interfering. I mean, we can't be bystanders, right? This is the time to actually intervene in these areas.
Thank you. So I'm just moving slightly from the mainstream politics, or from the political women's engagement and political arena, to how we really discuss or whether we acknowledge women contribution even in our home. So that is a really long way that I'm trying to connect. But have you ever felt this discussion about women contribution, even at the home, has been overlooked, or the contribution has remained in silo? We don't discuss enough.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, worldwide, this has been a huge debate, a huge issue. The household work, the value that is given to it, and traditionally it's been thought to be unproductive economically. Although we are doing the most productive work, I mean, without the productive work, without the work that we do inside our home, your economy wouldn't run. Your definition of economy literally wouldn't run. So I think that value in terms of recognizing that work is very important, and simultaneously it also has to be. We need to shatter the belief that the private sphere or the household sphere is only sort of for the women to do. So it should be equally shared. Your presence in the public sphere, now you have, women are gradually demanding and pushing through that arena, and emerging as very capable sort of workers in the public sphere, contributors in the public sphere. But at the same time, you can't have the double burden of making your presence in the public sphere as well as having to do your household work. It's impossible. No matter how much you sort of glorify women, there is that tendency to glorify women. And look at her, she's a, this good wife, good daughter, or a good mother, and yet she's, also out there working outside her home, and she's a top level whatnot, or she's a politician. It's very difficult. There's no need to glorify that. It's a fake glorification. We need to have equality in the household sphere, as well as work in the the public sphere. So, as we all know, the slogan of the feminist movement, which is that the private is political. It's that's why it's such a powerful thing, because for a long time, what happens within the household was shunned as something that's very private and nobody should have a say on anything of it. But it's highly political act. Whatever goes on within that sphere is also very important. So yeah, and I think the economist Meena Acharya was one of the first pioneering women in, and recently a book was released. I think all of us should read it.
So now, pivoting a little bit on different topic, just to give a context to our audience, Manusiji, Nepal's context is like more than 40% of the total population is under the age of 40. So as we advocate for the increasing participation of women, there is a similar call for youth leadership. Is our society clear about the type of youth leadership we need?
Well, this is, I mean, how do you know whether the society is very clear about and can we ever reach that clarity? That's another question, I guess. But I think what's really important is for us to understand that at this point in Nepal's history, as you already said, we have the youth bulge. It does not happen at all phases of our history. This is a peculiar sort of stage that we're in. And in a few decades, we are going to be an aging society. So to understand this demography is very important. So I don't know whether the society at large is aware of this, but I think at least people who are in positions of power to drive the society, to give leadership to the society, has to be very aware of this. And I think that bit is where it doesn't look very encouraging. Most of our politicians, mainly the mainstream politicians, are now being made aware of this fact, but then there's not much that they're actually doing about it. Because this youth bulge is also the population that is migrating at an accelerating sort of rate. Migration, of course, is nothing new. It's always been there in history, in our history. But the rate and the volume of migration that's happening right now, I teach college students, and now colleges in Kathmandu are finding it difficult to retain their students. Not only students, even teachers. Mm-hmm. Schools are finding it difficult to retain this, even professionals, skilled professionals. That means that, the kind of migration that's happening is of a very peculiar kind. Mm-hmm. It's not very encouraging. So to address that, our number one priority should be creating jobs here. Number one, that for the state to appeal to the youth that you have an opportunity here. And not only jobs, the fact that even professionals are migrating means that you need to have a livable sort of employment here, something of that does not deprive you of your dignity, that you can have a dignified life here. That should be the top priority of politicians. And this is something that I don't see the current government doing, or even the past. I mean, whoever's and the political chaos. One of the biggest reasons also behind this economic chaos is the political chaos. So this lack of realization that there should be more addressing of the demands of the young people. So every year around 5 to 6 lakh young people enter the job market. But then the jobs that the government is currently able to give out is around 50 to 60,000. Look at the gap. How do you fulfill that? That should be the number one priority. Instead, you hear them talk about giving free visas, free tickets, and making the whole, that governance aspect is there. That, those who want to migrate or go abroad to work, to make it hassle free is one thing. But just to focus on making migration easier without simultaneously or giving more effort to creating jobs here, look at the problem. It's almost like the political parties are feeding on this migration thing, because the more young people go abroad, you have less people complaining here, right? You have less agitation here.
That is an interesting way of looking into
because
it.
the remaining people, you can enslave them. So you join our party. If you join our party, then we'll give you some appointment, we'll make life easier for you in some way or the other. So, it's feeding on the whole process of, corruption in politics, the impunity that political leadership enjoys in Nepal, the lifestyle of the leaders, the, highly sort of bureaucratic functioning, which is full of hassles. This all feeds on a lot of young people migrating abroad. The frustration that is that exists among the young people right now. So it's about to, it's I think it'll burst at any moment.
That is really interesting insight. So you have already mentioned you are educator yourself. So what insights can you share about today's generation and their engagement in politics?
So I teach, I sort of, I'm an educator for students of gender studies in one college and the Open University, where I sort of teach political science. And both have, like, it's a very different picture. So one is a private college that is affiliated to Tribhuvan University. Most of the young people who get themselves enrolled is sort of a middle class, a fairly, privileged, English speaking mostly community, whereas in the Open University it's mostly people from outside Kathmandu who have had a big gap in terms of educational opportunities. We even have students who join from abroad, Saudi Arabia, Japan, other countries where they go for as migrant laborers. So considering this, it's very different. The privilege, the class background that you come from, the amount of desperation that you see among them is very different, because there are certain people who have a choice, who sort of enter politics through choice, and then there are others who are desperate, who are so desperate to sort of get out of the chains that they are in, that they're bound in, that they want to revolt, and they would really, it's about their livelihood, and they're in a hand to mouth situation. So it depends, even as an educator, the students that come from different background will have a different approach to politics. But in general, what I see is um, not many are very encouraged to, say, enter politics as an activist or as a politician. But there is a growing realization that the things that as they're happening in Nepal right now is not good. I don't see them being very comfortable with the status quo, but there is a cluelessness in terms of what to do about it. And so they look forward to having more people like them that they can relate to being in politics, who speak their vocabulary. Because I remember growing up, and because I entered politics when 20 years back, heavily, ideology driven politics, which was very necessary. It gives you a direction. But then, over the years, you also have to evolve. You have to develop, right? Because every new generation, with every new generation comes new challenges, right? And new demands. So the vocabulary of politics has to change, right? The priority of your political ideology also has to change. And because there's not been a development and an evolution in that sphere, it's more of like depoliticization, more of like disillusion with politics as general, putting everybody in the same frame and saying that, oh, all politicians are corrupt, and so it's also reached that level. But I also see areas where, which can be seen as opportunities, where you do have some exceptional people, even in my own class, who think differently, who want to challenge the status quo. So I do see that. So it's not entirely a grim picture, but for most of them, it's the undignified life that you have to live in Nepal. Whether are you going to get a job after college? Will you get paid enough to be able to live a fairly decent life in Nepal? So this is what drives them to make these livelihood choices. And so the status of the economy does not really give you the freedom to think about the kind of politics that you want in Nepal. You're so engaged in the day-to-day realities of your livelihood that you don't have a choice in terms of thinking freely about what kind of society do you want to build in Nepal. So that's a privilege and luxury that very few people have.
So as you mentioned about really challenging the status quo, I would like to connect it with education. How we are educating, what we understand by education in our education system. What has been your observation? What key element do you think are missing?
As a student activist, I had a slightly different approach as a student in Tribhuvan University, because I didn't do most of my schooling here. I went underground at the age of 10. So I changed schools like 6-7 times in my entire school journey. So Nepal's school education system, I did not have a very good exposure to, apart from, like, let's say, a few years, that also in private schools in Kathmandu. So a very privileged sort of education background. But as a student of Tribhuvan University was when I realized that our education system is really at the bottom level. And for me, there were a couple of things that drove me to do something about it. One was, for me, education should equip you with certain knowledge or something. In a very low income country like ours, I don't want to sound like a very idealist person and somebody with very grand narratives. I understand the importance of grand narratives, but when the majority of your country is poor and we are low income countries, I think our education system should also sort of strive to make you capable enough to sort of make a good living. That is one aspect. That is one thing that Nepal's education system was not doing even then. This was about like 15, 16 years ago when I was in Tribhuvan University. Ever since, you do have these documents and the national education policy and all, talking about vocational education and whatnot, about skill development and all of that, all limited in papers. They've not really translated or had the output that was expected in reality. The other aspect, though, of education is not only to produce skilled manpower or woman power or human resources. That's the vocabulary which I don't agree with. We need to, our education system needs to make us fully human being. It should be emancipating and liberating in terms of being able to make choices freely, make you critically look at issues and subjects, and the whole sharpening of the thinking process, asking the right questions, thinking of the alternatives, thinking bringing out solutions, and not being enslaved by anybody who's in power, politically and otherwise. That should be the goal of education, and not just making us human resources. So these were the two aspects that I found where Nepal's education system is very much lacking. And I think now as a teacher, I realize we have very big problems in terms of what we are teaching, who makes the syllabus, how are they communicated with students, to the students. So these are very specific areas that require concerted effort. So I don't want to make very blanket statements here. It's an interview where we can't, there's certain things we can't go into detail, but these are things that, let's say, our current education minister could think about. And because our school level education is, the local government has the jurisdiction over school education. So at different levels, we need to work these things out. But I would fairly say that what is taught, who makes them, how centralized our education system is, despite Nepal entering, the federal structure, the way of looking at education is still very much centralized. So all of these things need to be worked on. The reading culture, this is something I have really struggled with as an educator. These days, the students are just not willing to read much, which is very dangerous for any healthy democratic society. If the rote learning culture is still there, and we've reduced our semester system and a sophisticated college and the new system to just PowerPoint presentations where the teacher comes and just presents, and then it's a repetition in a new way of the traditional ways of teaching. How do we really democratize the whole process, where as an educator, I have that even I as an educator, I'm trusted with certain tasks of, and given the freedom of deciding how I want to what I want to discuss in the classroom, and also giving the freedom to the students of how they want to participate in the room, and break that hierarchy, that power structure that exists within our education system. So much of work to do at so many levels. But I think uh, one of the reasons that I'm very passionate about my job as an educator is that many things that I feel helpless in the political spectrum, in the political sphere, I feel that I am at least able to educate a group of people, and make them better human beings, make them better thinkers, better doers. So I think that's very important. I think being an educator is one of the most important um, body of people in society, especially in a country like Nepal, where there's a herd culture. There's constantly been a herd culture, which can lead to very dangerous outcome. So one of the very foundational things that you need to work on is the education system, to make people rational, to make them have a scientific temperament, to make them think critically. So I feel very happy at times that at least I am an educator, and things that I have failed to do in the political sphere, I can at least keep on going here. Although, I mean, my failure, which is the electoral failure, does not mean that I stop trying, but I think it's highly complementary.
So we are almost at the end. We have also touched upon this, I think, in earlier conversations regarding the around 9 lakhs of Nepali youth migrating every year. So amid this background, what direction should our country take to mitigate this issue? Do you really see, like, is there any potential for optimism?
Of course, we have to be optimistic. We can't give up at all. Every country, every society goes through its own sort of, struggling phases, and we are in at that phase. But every challenge means that we need to look for the opportunities. We need to create those opportunities. It's not an easy task, and so leadership at all levels, not only at the political sphere, young leaders in all aspects of life, whether it's the economic sphere, as educators, or as you as a journalist, we all are part of this process. But the main guiding factor is still politics, and so that is where the most difficult challenges lie. But I also see the possibilities there as well, because we know that almost 14% of the population is abroad, as laborers, mostly as migrant laborers. Um, and most of them are young people. So even though if we are lonesome right now in our effort, I think it's still a silver lining among the dark clouds. You do have certain people coming with very fresh perspectives, and who are challenging the status quo. So I think that's where we should be headed, to encourage their participation in politics. And I think that's where the mainstream political parties need to really be. I don't have much hope. I don't have much hope from the traditional political parties, but I do have. I would definitely give the newer, people emerging in politics the benefit of doubt. Um, but as long as they are, again, not, they don't get swayed by this wave of populism or this hero worship. We've seen that happening time and again in different decades of Nepal. We don't want another generation of young people again being swayed by this idea of one person coming with a magical wand, hero worshipping him, and it's mostly him. So that's something that we should be aware of. But I think apart from that, there are some promising younger people who are emerging as leaders, and I think that should be encouraging for all of us. Our main focus, once again, should be the economic arena. We need to have more you know, employment here, dignified jobs. At the same time, you know, at the same time, economic growth and all of that. I agree there should be economic growth, but then there's so many other aspects that are associated with it. Who gets the benefit of that economic growth? So then comes the whole issue of the marginalized communities, of the Dalits, the Madhesis, the women, you know, the Janjatis, the people from the far west. So all of these factors, you know, the people who are at the lowest rung of the society, you know, without addressing them, any aspiration for economic development is going to be lopsided. So I would say that is the most important issue right now, which needs to be complemented by radical changes in our education system.
Agree with that. So as we conclude our conversation today, so what changes do you um, hope for future, especially in politics in Nepal? You have touched a little bit in your answer earlier. And where do you see yourself in this evolving landscape of politics?
Well, I already talked about where I see the hopes in and what we should be focusing on. I would definitely look forward to more collaboration, you know, because I think I'm in politics because I see it as an organized activity. You could be political in another way also, right? All of us are political in our own way, as maybe as voters, maybe as somebody who's reading the newspaper, you know, or somebody who's just watching, you know, something on their phone. We are all engaged politically in some way or the other. But I have chosen to be in an organized sort of to do organized politics because it's about collaboration, because it's about joint effort, and it's not only about one person. It's about institutionalizing whatever you can, so that, you know, we as human beings are perishable, right? We're going to die, and that's the only truth, right? Our death. So the more important thing is to ask, what are you going to leave behind? So even as politician, our individual effort has a certain limitation. It is required. Individual effort is definitely required, but there's always a limit to that. So my sort of hope and my appeal is to make it a sort of a group effort, an organized effort, and to make it institutionalized, you know, because there's so many things that are structural in nature. You know, it's Nepal is not in a situation where you can just paint and sort of make it glossy. There's certain cracks of structural nature. So when you're talking about gender issues, about the economic crisis, there are huge structural cracks in our society. So for that, you know, individual effort is not going to be enough. So, you know, I am in a certain political party, somebody else, you know, I'm trying to expand that. I'm trying to expand my outreach. That's where I see myself. But again, only that is not going to be enough. I have to be at the center of it. I want to see myself at the center of the entire process, alongside a lot of people, like-minded people like me. You know, so that collaboration, culture of collaboration, I think needs to be developed now in Nepal. There's too much of, you know, unnecessary polarization among political parties. Polarization is largely about who gets what, you know. As a political party, you're constantly bargaining only for the appointments. Okay, I'm somebody from the big party, so I need certain number of seats in the political appointment. You get certain number. That's what the polarization is about in Nepal, right? And there's no collaboration in terms of policy making and law making, you know. So that's where I would like to really appeal to my like-minded people to also make that effort, joint effort to make you know, better laws, better policies, and through that to sort of create a better political culture, because that has an impact on how things are implemented. So
Should I
yeah,
take it as an open call for the like-minded people who want to join you?
of course, definitely,
Okay.
yeah.
That was a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time today, Manishiji.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.